Destiny 2, a game I really wanted to love, but for me it doesn't quite capture the magic of the original. Now, before the whole fanbase starts typing angry comments, let's take a journey through the highs and lows of a game that promised new legends will rise, but nowadays leaves me feeling empty. In this video I'll be sharing my story with Destiny 1, my initial excitement for Destiny 2, and why, despite the amazing gunplay and graphics, it feels like the spark just isn't there anymore. Disclaimer: in this first section I'm going to talk about Destiny 1 for around 4 minutes, so if you're not interested in that, you can skip to the next part of the video. Destiny 1 was the first FPS game I ever got to play. I always saw my dad play games in the living room, like Far Cry, Tomb Raider and Grand Theft Auto, but he never let me play it, because I was too young at the time. And yes, I deliberately used both Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 covers, because the bastard had both. Damn, I was jealous. When I was around 12 years old, he finally let me play some adult games. I started playing Halo 3, Bioshock, Half-Life 2 with the orange box, but my first game was Destiny. He installed a demo for me, and for months I just played the demo over and over. He already got a PlayStation 4 at the time, so the graphics were magnificent to me, since I was still a kid. But even till today, these are some of the best graphics I've ever seen. At my birthday, he got a game for me, the Legendary Edition even. The first moment I booted it up felt so magical. Seeing the logo come up and hearing the music kick in still gives me a special feeling. He rarely bought a game for me, so I mostly just played demos on my PlayStation Portable. I was extremely hyped, but also calm at the same time. The only bummer was that I could only play the game when he wasn't home, because the PS4 was hooked up to our living room TV with these bezels. But the times that I could play, wow. The first thing that caught my attention, maybe an unusual one, was the UI. It already starts at the first cutscene. It's this sort of line art that's really mesmerizing to look at. When the actual gameplay section starts, you notice just how clean and minimal it is. When you enter a new area, it shows you for a short time. The same happens with the current quest information. It disappears after a short time, so it doesn't distract you from the pure gameplay experience. The minimap, if you can even call it that, doesn't show the actual map. It only shows nearby friends and the direction of nearby enemies. When opening the character screen, you get greeted with another very clean interface. All the information, like your different gear and defense level, is very easily identified and changed. I know there are many more UI elements, but I could fill a whole video with it, which I'm not gonna do in this one. And the thing that stands out because of the minimal UI are the graphics. I just can't say anything else than that they're insanely good. Like, you can compare them to recent games like Skull and Bones, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League and Redfall, and Destiny 1, released 10 years ago, looks even better. Bungie was really ahead of its time. A big part of it is that the environments felt lived in and believable. For example, the Cosmodrome not only includes NPCs, but also old buildings left behind by humanity, like crashed planes and broken down buildings. And in the garden, a metaphor for the probability space from which all possible universes could arise, are ancient robots of the cyber-organic species Vex. It really feels like an environment like you've never experienced, because of the unique architecture and small details. The scale of the environments was also really impressive, not only the backdrops, but mainly the gameplay sections. Mars, for example, has this very large open area, called the Barrens, which you have to travel through to reach the buried city. This didn't feel like a chore at all to me. I simply enjoyed the scenery and wonderful graphics. The last thing I want to mention is how amazing the gunplay feels. There's just no other game like it. There's a real weight to the weapons, and every bullet feels like it matters. Landing a headshot with a sniper felt so satisfying, and shooting a rocket launcher into a group of enemies was just pure fun. The variety of weapon types offered something for everyone.
Right tool for every job. Let's talk.
My favorite weapons were auto rifles for primary, sidearms for special, and grenade launchers for heavy. I really liked the variety that this looting style offered, since in one mission I could use a pulse rifle, while in the next one a hand cannon for example. I never played the Crucible though. I tried it for a few times, but I felt like the gameplay mechanics and PvP part just didn't fit together. The player movement and guns just felt too slow for me. But maybe that's because I was used to Black Ops 2. A few years later I got my own console, an Xbox One S, disc edition of course. I don't want it all digital shit. Destiny 2 was about to release, and since I didn't have much money as a teenager, I bought the regular edition this time. And now you may wonder, Destiny 2 is a free-to-play game, right? Well, not at the beginning. That was only after around 2 years. Nevertheless, my anticipation was just as high as for Destiny 1, so I slotted the disc in and was again hit by the logo and soundtrack. The introductory mission transported me right back into the world I'd grown to love. It starts with a short cutscene to explain what happened in Destiny 1, and after creating your character, throws you right into the action. It wasn't just teaching me the controls, it was reminding me why I loved being a Guardian. From the very first moments, the leap in graphical fidelity from Destiny 1 to Destiny 2 was definitely noticeable, even though Destiny 1 already looked really good. Bungie pulled out all the stops, and it felt like I was playing a trailer. It was so real. My favorite location is actually from the recently released expansion The Final Shape. The lost city within the Traveler just has this atmosphere, with the building style, it being overtaken by nature, and the detailed vertical level design is what makes it my favorite area. Another new thing was the introduction of new subclasses. Each had a unique set of abilities, which allowed me to experiment with different playstyles. They also were present in Destiny 1, with 3 subclasses for every main class, but not this expansive. I only had one hunter character, so that only gave me access to 3 subclasses. In Destiny 2 I started with the Arc Strider, drawn by the Arc Staff. Chaining together attacks with a speed that made me feel invincible felt really cool. But then curiosity got the better of me, and I had to try Night Stalker. Even though the super ability wasn't that different, the way of the Trapper really appealed to me, with increased movement speed and an enhanced motion tracker. Let's talk about the early story and campaign of Destiny 2, particularly the Red War, Curse of Osiris and Warmind expansions. These really were the golden days of Destiny 2 in my opinion. The Red War began Destiny 2's story, and started right away with a dramatic narrative. The lost city had fallen, the Traveler was captured, and the Guardians were scattered. The missions were intense and fast-paced, with beautiful levels, like the worn-torn streets of the city and the last boss fight at the base of the Red Legion. The Curse of Osiris expansion took a different turn, taking place on the planet Mercury. The gameplay here revolved around the Vex, a mysterious race with diverse enemy types. Navigating the environment was both challenging and fascinating. I loved the architecture and design of Mercury, with its golden structures and ancient relics. Each mission demanded strategic thinking and showcased the game's ability to blend storytelling with innovative level design. Warmind, the next chapter, took us to the polar ice caps of Mars. The story focused on the reawakening of Rasputin, an ancient and powerful AI, and the Hive with its worm god. The gameplay and level design was less vertical and expansive than in the Curse of Osiris, but I did enjoy the variety in environments, and they still were quite impressive. The frozen caves of Mars have a certain mysterious vibe to them, while the high-tech interiors of Rasputin's facilities contrast that. One of the missions that always stood me by since was where you had to defend Rasputin's neural network from a Hive attack. And it's actually for an unusual reason, because this mission reminds me of the Ark mission in Titanfall 2, where you had to rush through a similar environment. But the ending of course also left its mark, with Rasputin promising to defend humanity on his own terms. And while talking about one of my favorite missions, the character that I remember the most vivid is Cayde 6. He's just so cool and funny, and really feels like he has a distinct personality.
Am I right or am I right? I'm right.
He has a hidden sense of honor and moral code behind his persona as a roguish type, while holding on to his charm and soul. One of the most memorable moments with Cayde 6 was during the Forsaken cutscene, where he's being ambushed at a jailbreak. When he's almost defeated, he still doesn't go down without a fight, which represents his vanguard mentality. The transition of Destiny 2 to a free-to-play model was a huge happening, not only in its own community, but also in the whole gaming industry. This move dramatically broadened the game's accessibility, allowing anyone with an internet connection and a half-decent gaming rig or console to dive into the universe without paying a penny up front. Well, not exactly, but we'll get to that in a bit. On one hand, it was exciting to see new players exploring the worlds and joining the fight. On the other, it raised questions about how this shift will affect the game's economy, community and future. The impact on the player base was immediately noticeable. Where the tower was before an almost empty hub, suddenly it was full of activity, filled with a mix of seasoned veterans and newcomers. The wave of new players breathed fresh life into the game, restoring public events and filling up PvP lobbies. It was like the early days of Destiny 2 all over again. And it wasn't only new players who started playing the game. People who had quit the game came back to see what had changed. A learning curve for both was inevitable though. During this transition, Bungie made some, let's call it, controversial decisions. The introduction of the content vault was one of them. The idea was to manage the game's size and performance by cycling out older content, mostly for previous generation consoles. But for many longtime players, this felt like losing treasured memories. Overnight, missions, raids and entire planets were locked away into the vault. Parts of the game's lore were being erased. This felt like losing pieces of my character's history. The community's reaction to the content vault was mixed, to say the least. Some understood the necessity for technical reasons, while others were outright furious. Forums and social media lit up with debates, with many players feeling a sense of betrayal. This move sparked discussions about the game's future. Would more content be vaulted? How would Bungie balance the introduction of new content with the preservation of the old? The broader consequences were clear. While the content vault might help keep the game manageable and fresh, it also risked alienating a dedicated player base that valued its history and continuity. But of course, it always ends up being about money. The introduction and expansion of microtransactions and the Eververse store became the new economic structure. I'm just glad that Destiny 2 never became pay to win. You can only buy cosmetics, like emotes, weapon ornaments and armor sets. While many items remained earnable through gameplay, some of the most desirable cosmetics and gear were locked away behind a paywall. In my eyes, this just allowed Bungie to fund ongoing developments. The game's transition also brought significant changes to its gameplay mechanics and progression systems, mainly the leveling system. Previously, progression felt more straightforward. You completed missions, participated in activities, and gradually increased your character level and power level. With a new model, Bungie introduced a more complex seasonal leveling system, complete with season passes and a lot of bounties to grind. This aimed to keep players engaged over longer periods, but it also introduced a whole nother layer of grind. I will go into further detail about that in the next section of the video. The introduction of seasonal content meant that progression was now tied to time-limited activities and rewards. While this kept the game feeling fresh with regular updates and new content drops, it also created a sense of urgency and FOMO. Players, myself included, felt pressured to log in regularly to complete seasonal objectives and bounties, else I could miss out on exclusive gear. This shift from a more relaxed player at your own pace progression to a time-sensitive grind completely changed the dynamic of the game. The time before it was free to play, it was just simpler. I had more fun, it wasn't so complicated, and nothing felt too pushy towards me. Now, the joy of discovery and adventure that initially drew me to Destiny 2 was overshadowed by the need to keep up with the relentless pace of new content and an ever-present grind. It felt like the game I loved had almost become a second job. This was the final change that made me quit Destiny 2. Then in December of 2023, there was a short time period where Epic Games gave away the Legacy Collection DLC for free. This includes the expansion Shadowkeep, Beyond Light and the Witch Queen. I was hyped again to play it, since I always have had that soft spot for Destiny. When I launched the game around a year later after playing it for the last time, I immediately got thrown into some random ass mission, and I had no clue what was going on. My guess was that it had to do with the upcoming DLC Lightfall, but till this day I still have no idea what this mission was. And maybe that's a good description for the current state of the game. You don't remember the missions you've played, the loot you've acquired, the NPCs you've talked to. People play it because they have invested in it. For a more in-depth look into that, I highly recommend this video from Ren's Reviews. It's very enjoyable to watch. But first finish this video, please. And if you enjoyed it so far, consider subscribing and leaving a comment. You know what the algorithm is. The current state of Destiny 2, for me at least, is the sheer confusion and complexity that now surrounds its story. At the beginning, the game's narrative was straightforward. Fight back against the forces of the darkness, protect the lost city, and reclaim the Traveler's Light. But now, keeping track of Destiny 2's lore seems like a lot of work. With each new season and expansion, the storylines have become increasingly complex. You really needed to follow it all in the moment to keep up. But there's also a certain charm to the chaos. It keeps the game feeling alive and unpredictable. So, the story's complexity has both enriched the game and created a barrier for many players. The story isn't the only thing that is complex. The evolution of gameplay mechanics has also become increasingly hard to understand. What started as a straightforward FPS game with some RPG elements has transformed into a labyrinth of stats, mods and power level grind. In Destiny 1 and the beginning of Destiny 2, it was simply leveling your character. But today you have to closely manage a mass of stats like mobility, resilience and recovery. Not to mention dealing with a wide array of mods that can tweak almost everything. As I acquired weapons and armor, I got overwhelmed by all of its stats and mods. I don't even know what most of them mean. Like, what does discipline or intellect even do? And after looking at the mods page, I didn't have any idea what would fit my playstyle. And then there was my inventory. To me it just looked like a bunch of random things. Then I decided to take a different approach. I ignored the parts that were too hard to understand and just played the game. Surprisingly, this worked out fine. I focused on the basics, ensuring my power level was high enough to tackle new missions, not worrying about the contents of my inventory, and equipping weapons that just felt good to use and looked cool. This way I found a balance that allowed me to somewhat enjoy the game. So, Bungie sort of fixed the issue by not making players less powerful if they don't customize and upgrade much, but it does mean that there is no in-game guide or something to educate new players. They just have to figure it out with other online sources. Just a little side note, I actually got easier into Warframe than Destiny 2. I found the mechanics to be easier understandable, and the story is more linear in general. One of the most significant issues plaguing Destiny 2 is the relentless grind. While some degree of repetition is expected in any long-term game, Destiny 2 often takes it a step further. The cycle of completing the same activities over and over to earn gear, progressing quests or level up feels incredibly boring to me. An example, I was working on a quest that required me to kill 100 fallen enemies on the moon. Sounds simple enough, right? Wrong. The fallen only spawn in specific areas on the moon, and their appearances are infrequent at best. I found myself running in circles around the map, repeatedly visiting the same spots and hoping for enemies to respawn. What should have been a fun mission turned into a tedious routine. Despite my love for the universe and the amazing feeling combat, these moments of grind-induced repetitiveness make it hard for me to stay motivated. While there are many players that feel the same way about this, there are also those who love the grind. These dedicated guardians find joy in the challenge and have no problem putting in the hours to perfect their builds and complete every quest. It's this diversity of experiences and opinions that keeps the community engaged. I don't plan on returning to the game anymore, but there are a few changes that I think could improve the game. Simplifying the progression system, for instance, could go a long way in making the game more accessible. Reducing the grind and offering more meaningful rewards for our time and effort would also help. And, of course, bringing back some of the vaulted content could reawaken nostalgia and allow new players to better understand the story. So, here's a thought to leave you with. Will Bungie ever bring back the magic of Destiny 1, or has the light faded for good? Let me know what you think, and keep fighting the good fight.
Guardian.